You've got a deck that needs to come down, but you don't want to spend 3 weekends with a pry bar beating it apart. I've demolished more decks than I can count, and I'm about to show you some of the smartest and fastest ways to get it done. Okay, so we're on our latest deck build, and the first thing we have to do before we can rebuild the decks is take down the old deck. So what we're doing right now is we're in the middle of demolition, and I thought I would show you guys a couple different techniques that we use depending on elevation and safety levels of how we tear decks apart. I have a safe way to do it, and I have a faster way to do it if we're closer to ground level. So I've done the inspection on this deck. The deck is medium in height, so it's about 4 feet off the ground, so it's still a little bit easier to tear apart than something that, let's say, that's 10 feet high off the ground. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways that we traditionally tear decks down. We have some specialty tools that we're gonna use, and we also have a couple different techniques. Usually pulling screws out of the deck boards doesn't work too well, so we're probably gonna skip that and go straight into prying some of these boards off. This is an old composite deck, so there's gonna be some muscle involved in one technique, and then there's kind of a more hack and slash type of technique that we're gonna use on the other version of what I wanna show you guys, just to get my point across. So let's do those 2 methods. Let's go over here and we'll choose a spot to start tearing the decking apart, and then we'll go from there. All right, come on, let's check it out. So what we're gonna do is we're going to take 2 like 6 foot or maybe 5 foot by 10 foot sections of this deck apart. And before we do that, we have to remove some railing. So that's usually what we do first. It has to be done on every project. So we're not salvaging this railing. We're not trying to save it, none of that. So we're just gonna make 4 quick cuts on it with a sawzall. And then I'm just gonna toss the railing down here. So we have this little area that we've demoed a set of stairs and railings off of, and the guys are still working on it, but we're gonna go ahead and I'll just throw all my scrap down into this area. So it's not damaging anything. It's just a cool place for it to land. It's our drop zone, we'll call it. So everybody knows to steer clear when somebody's tossing something, but just a nice place to put everything and stage it and not make a mess out of the yard. So I'm just gonna grab a sawzall and make a few cuts. If you're not trying to salvage your railing, this is pretty much the fastest method I have to do this, except maybe a chainsaw. So if you want to use a chainsaw instead of a sawzall, I just happen to have a sawzall handy with a brand new blade on it, so I'm gonna use that. One thing you want to remember, if you're cutting through railing, there's usually fasteners, metal nails or screws going in through these top caps, so I'll never cut my line in this first section right here. I'll come over 6 inches and I'll cut here where I have a nice clean cut where I'm not gonna be damaging the blade. I am using a Milwaukee brand blade, not sponsored, but it's called an axe and it has some carbide teeth on it, so it should cut aggressive but relatively quickly. All right, here we go. Yeah, that's pretty quick. I can see the nails right here, so I don't want to try to cut through here and hit one of these nails. If I try to cut through here, I'll just damage my blade quicker. And I try to keep them as sharp as I can for as long as I can. Accidents happen, yes, but we just try to make them last as long as we can. Top done. Okay, that section's cut. I can just pull it away. Toss it down there. It just opens things up for us. I'll do the same thing over here. We have some stuff up against the house. I'm probably gonna cut this right here, and then we'll address this later where we take a little bit more time and we're a little more fragile up against the house so we're not damaging the siding. Now, if I wanted to, I could start to pry this a little bit. Part of the problem is when people build, sometimes they just nail right to the side of the house. That always creates issues with the siding, and we're trying not to damage it when we pull it apart. So one method would be to cut it here and then break these into smaller pieces to get around the nails. Another thing I might do is I might do a pull test and see, okay, how tightly is this railing attached to the house? Can I wiggle it out by moving it back and forth and see if I can bust those nails loose without damaging the side of the house? So let's start with that. I'm just kind of curious. It looks like as I'm starting to pull away, you can see I'm starting to break the caulk off the side of the house, and things are moving pretty good, and the siding is moving a little bit, but the railing's moving more. So I can see right now, yeah, that's a screw, so there was no way of fixing that. So there's a little bit of repair that has to happen there. We still have something going on down below. It looks like there's a couple more screws down there. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this right here, because there's no way of knowing what or how they fastened to the house when you're doing this. So the other way would have been to cut it first and then deal with it later, but there's no guarantees that I would have saved or done any better. There's a slight amount of damage on the house, but it's repairable. Okay, it fell off. So it had one nail or screw going into the side, but it's off now. So we'll go ahead. And that kind of gives us an idea of how the other side of the house is going to be attached as well. So we may try to go in and undo that screw or cut the screw, and then just simply we'll come in and we'll either use a knife or a scraper or something and scrape all this caulk away. There was a couple more fasteners on the back side of here, unfortunately. Oh man, I just don't understand why some people do this kind of work. You know, just put a post right here, guys, instead of attaching it right to the side of the house, because someday it's gonna have to be replaced. And then you don't have to deal with this mess. But you know, you do you and I'll do me. So for this video, we're basically gonna do 5 by 10 foot. The deck's 10 feet deep. We like to cut our materials down to 5 feet. We have a 12-foot bed in our truck. So if we cut the materials down to 5 feet, then we can stack 5 feet and then come out another 5 feet, and it gives us an ability to put a lot of material in the truck quickly and stack it equally. So 5 feet is right in the middle of these two joists. So I'm gonna cut a line right through here, and then I'm gonna do another one at 5 feet right here, right on the side of this joist right here, okay? And that'll be my 2 sections for cutting apart. I'm gonna do 2 different methods. I'm gonna do one where I'm gonna pull all the deck boards off with my deck pulling tools. Usually we do that on really tall decks where we have to dismantle the deck, but then I have another method I wanna show you where I'm actually going to just cut lines in between the decking, and then I'm gonna cut the joists side by side, or then I'm gonna cut the joists on each end and just take the whole section out as decking and joist. It takes up more volume in space as far as like, if we're trying to pack a truck to go to the dump, I like the first method I'm gonna show you better because we can stack it like Tetris. This way you have a little bit more volume where it takes more space in the truck, and you might have to make multiple trips with the second method, but it's much faster to take apart in my opinion. So we'll just get started and I'll show you guys the difference. All right, so this post is kind of in my way, so I'm just gonna make a quick cut over here, and then I'm just gonna cut right down the middle. So the reason the saw kept bogging down was, I think as I'm cutting this decking, the board is pinching. It's like the deck's moving a little bit while I'm cutting the decking, and it's pinching on the blade and making it bind. So I had to keep pulling the saw out to do it. We may switch saws to a more powerful saw to see if it doesn't bog, or it just by cutting it in a different spot may not do the same thing that it did here. So all I'm doing now is I'm just getting one deck board removed so that I can start using my pry bar tools to pop all the deck boards up. So I just need to cut a little bit extra out of this one deck board to do that. Okay, there we go. Oh boy. Boy, these are really in here because this deck's covered. These are really in here. So now I'm thinking, do I possibly try to remove these deck boards? But that would be a pain in the rear. Sometimes the hardest part is getting the first one popped, and then we can use leverage as our friend. Let's see if we can just get one to pop. Man, we're really gonna need leverage. I think there's screws, okay. So this decking, it's old Trex and it's old composite. You can smell it, man. If you've ever installed an old Trex deck, you know what I'm talking about. I think that because this deck is covered and it's been covered all its life, the staircases came apart very easily, but usually when things are undercover, they take a little bit longer to tear out. So we might be in for a challenge on getting this done. Okay, now that we have the first board up, we have a couple different pry bar tools here. This is normally how we demo a deck. We come in and we use these two different removal tools. Okay, there's a problem right here where we have a section of the deck that goes underneath this siding, so we really can't pry on it. We'd either have to pry all the boards this way, or I'm gonna run a line with my saw really quick to take out this so that these pop a lot easier. So let me do that. So a quick tip for you, sometimes if you're experiencing that problem, I just loosened up my depth gauge on my saw for my plate and left it loose, and then it frees up the saw a little bit, the blade, and you can raise and lower the blade easier to keep it from binding so bad. Okay, let's see how that worked. All right, so now it's just a simple repeat process. This deck is a little bit harder to remove. Like I said, it's covered, so the joists aren't as old as they would be on the outside, but it's still working. This is called a deck wrecker, I believe. This is the deck wrecker, and this is called a demo deck. And this is basically a wheelbarrow handle with a piece of metal forged to it. And these are both tools that I've used year over year demoing decks, and each one has a specific use. Let's see how this one works. It's all about leverage. So when you get closer to the house, you can't use a demo deck, but you can use one of these. So it just kind of depends which situation you're in. What we're having to do on this particular demo is we are having to rip the decking either out of the joists, the screws out of the joists, or rip the decking through the screws to get it to come off with this method. Definitely going to condense better in the truck, but there might be a few other issues doing it demo the other way. I think this is probably the last joist I'll be able to use the demo deck on. All right, so when you're demoing a deck and you cut a line through the decking and the decking is random length, there's just various lengths of decks, you're eventually going to cut through somewhere where there's going to be a butt joint on the opposing side of your cut. So watch your step. Sometimes I poke those through because it's really easy to make a mistake and walk through here and step on this board right here. You could get hurt if you fall through the deck or slip or fall or twist your ankle or something like that. So just be aware of those spaces when you're doing your demo. There's a seam right here and nothing holding the weight of this side of the deck on. So you can see it wants to drop. So just a little FYI, a little heads up kind of thing. Let's get this last full deck board off of here. The last part of this deal is to get this section ready to go is I got to cut the joists out of it. So I'm just doing that quickly with a rear handle saw, and it's just 4 joists, but I got to get them cut to get them out of the way so that this section's pretty much demoed. Then we have this little outside section to deal with, but it's a specialty section. So we're not going to tear that apart right now. We're just trying to show you the difference between one of our traditional ways of demoing compared to what I think is a faster way. All right, so we have finished our first part of the demo. I'd call that a traditional way we would demo decks. We've done it that way for many, many years. But now we're gonna do a little bit speedier demo. One thing I did do is because I noticed how weak the Metabo saw was cutting and it was binding up and getting a lot of composite gumming up the blade and pinching it, I went to a little bit more powerful saw. So I'm gonna go with this DeWalt saw. It has a skate plate on it. So the skate plate lets things ride a little bit easier. They roll easier, so it makes for an easier cut. And I'm also gonna leave the depth level gauge unlocked so that the base plate moves up and down like this. So that should hopefully make an easier cut, because now I'm going to be cutting a line through each area, each joist I'm cutting a line through, and you'll see why in a minute. But we're just gonna cut one line in between each joist where the decking is, and then we're gonna just cut 2 lines with the sawzall, and we're gonna drop these joists with all the decking on them and everything, and we'll see if that speeds things up a little bit. I'm pretty sure it's going to. That worked a lot better. We got a post in our way, so I'm just gonna kind of cut a little funky. I think this blade might even be a little bit dull. Seems to be still cutting all right. So now what I've done is I've cut through, you saw that? Now I'm gonna step down here and I'm just gonna use a sawzall, because I can't really fit a skill saw in here, or a warm drive saw, or a rear handle saw. Hey, be careful. When you cut a bunch of lines like this and you're walking across it, be very careful, because you can trip and fall and everything's loose now. A little more dangerous way to do this, okay? So I'm gonna stand on the joists. You can see the decking move. Okay? So just watch it. Here we go. Obviously this is more chunky and it'll take a little bit more finesse to get it into the back of our truck. If you have a big container, who cares? Just toss it in there and get rid of it. But we have to transport it to the local dump. So I'm probably gonna take a little bit more time to kind of condense this down a little bit, but it's very quick on getting the same amount of square footage of decking and framing removed from your deck in a quick way. All right, guys, well, I think the rest of this deck, we are gonna do it like this, because we don't have to pry the boards off and take all that additional time doing so. So if we helped you figure out a fast way to tear down your deck safely, or maybe quicker than you were going to, please hit that subscribe button and that bell icon. And don't forget to watch all of our videos. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.